Today I want to talk about something that I find both funny and frustrating at the same time. And that's the experience of being called stupid, or at least being seen as lacking common sense, when you're actually someone who thinks deeply about almost everything. I'm Jhonna, and I want to be honest from the start. This video is partly personal. I've had moments in my life where people looked at me like I was completely lost, like I had no idea what was happening around me, when internally I was processing something at a level that I couldn't explain fast enough for the conversation I was in. And I know I'm not alone in that. So let's talk about INFJs, high IQ, low IQ, common sense, and what actually makes someone appear stupid to the people around them. Because it's a lot more complicated than most people realize. Let me start with the concept that I think explains a lot of the confusion. Most of the world operates on what's called a preference for visible, fast, practical results. If you can solve a problem quickly and explain your thinking clearly in simple terms, you're considered smart. If you take too long, hesitate, stumble over your words, or appear distracted, you're considered slow. And INFJs, by their very nature, tend to look slow from the outside even when they're not. Here's a very specific example of what this looks like. Someone asks you a question, and instead of giving a quick answer, you go quiet for a few seconds. What's actually happening inside your head during those seconds is intense. Your brain is running through the history of the situation, thinking about how this connects to something you noticed 3 weeks ago, considering what the long-term impact of different answers might be, and checking whether your response is going to land the way you intend. To the person watching, though, it just looks like you're taking too long. They conclude that you probably don't know, or that you're not that sharp. This is one of the most common ways INFJs get mislabeled. The depth gets mistaken for emptiness. The pause gets read as confusion. There's also the physical dimension of this, which I find fascinating and, honestly, very relatable. INFJs are known for being a bit, let's say, disconnected from the immediate physical world. You might forget where you put something you were holding 30 seconds ago. You might trip over something obvious. You might walk into a room and then forget why you went in there. And when people see this happen repeatedly, they form an impression. They think this person can't even manage basic things, so how can they be smart? But here's what's actually going on. When your brain is constantly processing, when you're running mental simulations and thinking in images and patterns and possibilities, it takes cognitive resources. Resources that aren't being used to notice the chair leg you're about to walk into. Your brain isn't less capable. It's just spending its capacity somewhere else. There's actually a term for this in psychology called cognitive decoupling. It describes the ability to mentally step away from the immediate physical environment in order to run internal scenarios. High IQ people do this a lot. And the cost is exactly what it sounds like. You're good at simulating, but you're not always good at staying present in a room. So the person who can explain a complicated idea in depth but can't figure out which direction to exit a parking lot isn't stupid. They're just using their brain for a different kind of task than the one in front of them. Now let me talk about the IQ piece more directly because I think it's worth being honest about both ends of this. For INFJs who have high processing speed and strong verbal ability, the main challenge is that their thinking tends to be nonlinear. Their ideas don't come out in a straight line. They come out as images, impressions, feelings, and connections between things that aren't obviously related. When they try to explain something, it can come out sounding disorganized, even if the underlying understanding is solid. And for a listener who thinks in a more logical, step-by-step way, that can sound like someone who doesn't actually know what they're talking about. This is genuinely frustrating, especially when you can sense that you understand something clearly, but you can't get it out of your head in a way that convinces the person in front of you. It's like having a clear picture in your mind and being handed the wrong kind of pen to draw it with. For INFJs who don't have high processing speed, the challenge is different but related. The intuition is still there. The sense of people, the reading of situations, the ability to notice something is off before anyone else does, that's all still present. But without the verbal and logical tools to explain what they're sensing, they can sound vague. They say things like, I just have a feeling about this, or something doesn't feel right, and without a clear explanation attached, other people don't take it seriously. They get labeled as dramatic, or irrational, or just not that bright. And the irony is that they're often right. The feeling turns out to be accurate. But by then, the moment for being taken seriously has passed. Let me talk about something called disrationalia, because I think it's one of the most useful concepts for this conversation. Disrationalia is the term psychologists use to describe the gap between raw intelligence and the ability to make practical, reasonable decisions in everyday life. Put simply, you can have a very high IQ and still struggle with common sense. And the two things genuinely don't measure the same thing. IQ tests measure things like pattern recognition, processing speed, spatial reasoning, and verbal ability. They don't measure how well you manage your daily life. They don't measure whether you'll remember to pay your bills on time. They don't measure whether you'll make a good decision under emotional stress. Those things involve a different set of skills, and many highly intelligent people, INFJ or otherwise, find those things genuinely difficult. I find this concept useful because it removes the judgment from what often gets labeled as stupidity. It's not that someone is dumb. It's that they're using their cognitive energy on a different frequency than the one the task requires. There's also something called decision fatigue that I think is worth knowing about, especially for anyone who deals with chronic pain or health conditions. Decision fatigue is a real, scientifically documented phenomenon. The more decisions you make in a day, the worse your judgment gets as the day goes on. Your brain uses actual glucose, a physical fuel, to process choices. And when that fuel runs low, your ability to make good practical decisions drops. For someone who's already managing physical pain, emotional stress, hormonal shifts, or financial pressure, the decision fatigue kicks in much earlier. So if you make a decision that seems obviously wrong to someone on the outside, it doesn't mean you lack intelligence. It might mean your brain has already used up most of its fuel just surviving the first half of the day. Now let me talk about the relationship judgment piece, because I think this is the area where INFJs get called stupid the most often, and the one where the label feels the most unfair. People on the outside look at an INFJ staying in a difficult relationship or continuing to help someone who keeps taking advantage of them, and they think, this person has no common sense. Can't they see what's happening? Are they really that blind? But here's what's actually going on. INFJs don't just see behavior. They see context. When someone acts selfishly or hurtfully toward them, their brain doesn't just register the action and file it as bad. It immediately starts asking what's underneath it. Were they hurt as a child? Are they under unbearable pressure right now? Is this who they actually are, or is it a temporary state? That process isn't naive. It's actually a very high-level form of moral reasoning. The problem is that it takes time, and it can make the person appear to have no judgment at all to people who are operating on a faster, simpler model. The INFJ isn't blind to what's happening. They're often more aware of it than the people judging them. They're just running a more detailed analysis before they act. And that analysis includes the possibility, however small, that they might be wrong, that things might change, that cutting someone off might be more harmful than waiting a little longer. Until it isn't. Until the famous INFJ door slam happens, which is when the analysis is finally complete and the conclusion is reached. And when that moment comes, it usually comes completely and permanently. Not impulsively, but finally. There's also a pattern that I think of as the Cassandra effect. In Greek mythology, Cassandra was a woman who had the gift of accurate prophecy, but was cursed, so that no one believed her. And that's genuinely what it can feel like to be an INFJ who sees something coming before anyone else does. You try to warn people. They don't listen. The thing you predicted happens. And instead of saying you were right, they either say you got lucky, or they move on as if nothing happened. It's a no-win situation socially, and it's one of the more quietly exhausting parts of this wiring. I want to say something directly to anyone watching this who has been called stupid, or who has spent time wondering if maybe they just don't have common sense. The label usually says more about the person applying it than it does about you. People who operate on speed, practicality, and visible results will always find someone who operates on depth, patience, and long-term thinking to be confusing. That doesn't make you deficient. It makes you different. And different isn't the same as lesser. It does mean, though, that you have to be honest with yourself about where your actual gaps are. If you regularly miss practical things that create real problems in your life, it's worth paying attention to that, not to punish yourself for it, but to build systems that compensate. Reminders. Simple routines. Ways of externalizing the practical stuff, so your brain doesn't have to hold it while it's busy doing what it actually does well. Common sense, the practical kind, isn't fixed. It can be developed. It improves with experience, with paying attention to what trips you up, and with being honest about your own patterns. The fact that it doesn't come automatically doesn't mean you can't get better at it over time. Before I close, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where someone called you stupid or assumed you lacked judgment, and you knew they were wrong but couldn't explain yourself fast enough to change their mind? And how did you handle it? Drop it in the comments, because I think this is one of those experiences a lot of people carry quietly and don't talk about enough. Thanks for watching. If this video resonated with you, please consider hitting the subscribe button. I want to be upfront and share that I use this text-to-speech voice to tell my stories because, as a full-time ESL teacher, I have to be very careful with my vocal cords. Managing vocal nodules means I have to save my voice for my students, but I didn't want that to stop me from sharing these unfiltered thoughts with you. I'm Jhonna, and I'm currently working toward my goal of 1,000 subscribers so I can finally monetize this channel and turn this passion into a sustainable part of my future. This is my diary of solo living here in the Philippines, and your support, whether through a comment or a sub, helps me keep this channel growing. If you would like to help out even more, you can check out the Buy a Treat for My Pets link in the description. My dogs definitely appreciate the love. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss the next update. Thank you for being such an important part of this journey. I'm Jhonna, and I will see you in the next one.